Project FanCare's main tool for helping people is live panels at fan conventions, where we talk about how film, TV, and fandom can help people with depression, anxiety, and trauma. Some of our team recently got together to recreate our live panel so you can have access to that content. If you're interested in getting all that content right now, stay where you are and keep watching. Hi, I'm Christine, and this is the video channel of Project FanCare, a nonprofit dedicated to helping people learn how to use film, TV, and fandom to help with depression, anxiety, and trauma. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow us on all our social media to keep up to date on our live event schedule, as well as become part of our community. Now, I've wanted to put together a video version of our live panel for a while now, and with the current quarantine, it seemed like a perfect time to do it. The psychologists we have on today's panel are Dr. Janina Scarlet and Dr. Lynn, both of whom have been with Project FanCare from the beginning. So you are truly getting the Project FanCare live panel experience. Now, the structure of this virtual panel is exactly the same as our live one. To begin, I tell my story of how film, TV, and fandom helped me deal with depression, anxiety, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Then Janina and Lynn talk about the science, psychology, and research behind why this is such a powerful therapeutic tool. Then someone who works on the other side of the autograph table, and today that's talent agent Chad Colvin, tells their own story of how it helped them. Now, the most important thing about our live panel is that at the end of the presentation, we then open it up to the audience to hear their stories. How has a film, a TV show, or a character, or even a specific episode helped them? This sharing of community creates an amazing experience, and it's the one thing that can't be replicated in our virtual panel. So I hope you will help us duplicate the experience of the virtual panel by leaving comments below on how a film, TV show, particular episode, particular character helped you. And stay tuned after the panel content for a few more tips on how to use film, TV, and fandom to help with depression, anxiety, and trauma. Now, like I do in the live panels, I'm going to give a trigger warning. This is about depression, anxiety, and trauma, and we're very honest and we go into specifics. So just keep that in mind as you watch. Now, on with the show. This is the video version of the convention panel of Project FanCare. I have team members with me, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute here. Yeah, so, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. We will start now on my gallery screen. It goes in a particular direction, so I'll start that way. So, Lynn, a little bit about background, who you are.
Sure. I'm Lynn Zabernis. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a professor at Westchester University, which is outside of Philadelphia. And my research area, because I sort of was introduced to the value of this when I was doing a lot of clinical work, my research area is the psychology of being a fan and how being a fan is really helpful to us in a lot of different ways. And recently, I've written a lot of books about why it's powerful for us to be fans of things and what that does for us, including a bunch of books with the actors from some of the properties that have been really influential for fans, so that in the books, people can hear from both the actors portraying the fictional characters that have really been important to them and from fellow fans who've been impacted by the show and the fictional characters in the same way. So in that way, we hope to make a difference by really inspiring people and also validating why being a fan is a good thing and a healthy thing and a positive thing.
And Janina, a little bit about you and your background and why you do this?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dr. Janina Scarlet. I'm a clinical psychologist, award-winning author, and a full-time geek. And I specialize in incorporating different fandoms into clinical work to helping folks with post-traumatic stress disorder to learn how to become the hero of their own journey. So fandoms from Harry Potter to Supernatural to DC, Marvel, Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars, etc.
Okay, Chad, just a little bit of your background.
My name is Chad Colvin. I'm not a doctor of any sort. I live just near Madison, Wisconsin. I am a journalist for over 10 years. I was an editor for a entertainment-based sci-fi website, news website. Then I spun that about 5 years ago with the contacts that I had into opening my own kind of boutique appearance agency. So now I book actors for Comic-Cons, and I've got about 100 clients now, and they run the gamut from main actors on Star Trek and Next Gen and DS9 to Stargate, all those shows, Harry Potter, Supernatural, Power Rangers, all over the board.
We start our panels by me telling my story, because that's how I got started in fandom, and that's why Project FanCare got started. And I am brutally honest, and this is an honest video. We talk about honest things, so a little bit of a trigger warning for issues. Just if you're watching this through video, just so you know that as we go through. This is the beginning of my story. In 2011, I was lying on the floor of my suburban faux farmhouse in the upstairs hallway, asking God to kill me. I knew I was struggling with depression and anxiety like I had all my life, but something else was going on. I didn't know what it was. But I vividly remember being there on that floor, wanting to die. Now, go back to beginning. I have always had voices in my head telling me I suck, no one likes me, everything you do will fail, there's no reason for you to be alive, you might as well be dead. I mean, since I can remember being sentient, I have had these voices in my head. My therapist asked me where they came from, and I said, I have always had them. So I don't know, and I still have them. I don't know how not to have them. As a teenager, I had my first deep suicidal depression and have struggled with depression cyclically ever since then. In adulthood, I had my first anxiety attack, and then have also dealt with anxiety cyclically since then. Then what happened in 2011 when I was lying on the floor, in addition to what I had come to be familiar with as my regular depression and my regular anxiety, was an inability to think I was allowed to feel or allowed to have opinions or allowed to function. And what I found out later was that I had complex post-traumatic stress disorder that had come from living with someone for obsessive compulsive personality disorder for decades. And essentially I had reacted as if I was living in a cult. Now, Lynn and Janina, I'll do a short description of OCPD just for background, but if I do say something wrong, please correct me. One of the characteristics of that personality disorder is they need to have control of everything. And the more anxiety they feel, the more they have to have control. And their way of doing things, there are rules in the way the world works, and their way of doing something is always the right way, objectively. So combine that with my constant depression and anxiety, and it was a perfect storm of two forces. Basically, I came to the point where, well, I suck. Everything I do is wrong. So, and this person says everything they do is right. So that must be right. So everything I think is wrong. Everything I feel is wrong. I'm not allowed to have feelings that aren't the same as this other person's feelings. It was like being in a cult. It was debilitating. I did not know that was what was going on at the time, but I found out later That's what it was, CPTSD. Around that time, it was the beginning of Netflix streaming and and Ion television, which I don't know if Ion's even on anymore, but they were running episodes of Criminal Minds. And I was in this terrible state, depressed, anxious, and having the symptoms of CPTSD. And I watched an episode of Criminal Minds called The Crossing. And there's a scene in there that really struck me through even my haze of awfulness that I was in. The background is Rossi and Hotch have been called in by a prosecutor to interview a woman. She murdered her husband. There's no question of that. But she is presenting a battered woman defense. I think what used to be called Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know what the clinical name for that kind of defense would be now. And the prosecutor has asked Rossi and Hotch to interview her and find out whether she's pretending. And this is the scene. Just watch it and then I'll talk about it.
Did Philip ever hit you?
Hit me?
Was he abusive?
No, never. Not even when I probably deserved. No, he was very patient with me.
Why did he need to be patient?
Well, are you kidding? Look at me. After Nathan was born, I completely let myself go. I'm fat. I'm a terrible housekeeper. I'm a terrible cook. No, believe me, I needed a husband with a lot of patience.
Audrey, Nathan tells us that you never attended any of his sports or school functions, that you were never there, not even once.
He's probably right.
Why didn't you?
Well, I was doing such a terrible job at home, I didn't want to embarrass my kids out in public, too.
I saw that, and it wasn't the first time I watched it. Maybe it was the second time I watched it. So thank goodness for streaming, or none of this would have ever happened. I recognized myself in this woman. Her facial expressions, her tone of voice, how she viewed herself. That was me. And it was the first time I even had a glimmer of, you mean this isn't the way where I'm supposed to be? You know, that there's a reality other than being this way? So, I mean, it was kind of my lifeline. I'm sitting in the bottom of a well, is just the concept that the way I was feeling was not, excuse the expression, normal. And from that point on, it was, basically one hand on the rope, two hands on the rope, one slide back down for months going into years. It was watching more TV, it was therapy, it was medication, and it's not a fast process, it's a slow process, and I'm still in process. Everything isn't fixed, and I still have the voices. But it was the shows initially. Buffy the Vampire Slayer especially, seeing so many of the issues she had. There are episodes in there I talk about still the wish once more with feeling normal again, in which she and all the characters struggle with do they have a right to have feelings? Do I have a right to have feelings? And that helped me process some of that stuff. So that's my personal testimony, to use a phrase in my Christian circles. Now, once I started getting into fandom, going to conventions, I talked to a lot of people, I found out so many people have had similar experiences to me. And I'm a researcher and an academic and an analyzer that's my favorite thing to do, and it's what I'm best at. And so I analyzed my own experiences and wrote about them and did some videos about them. And I came up with what I thought was an original idea, that, hey, there are two ways that this is helping me. There's the stories themselves that are really helping me work through these issues. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Wonder Woman, Supernatural, some old classic Hollywood films. And then there's the fandom community that I just got involved with, that I just met, and that they are my people. I am immediately comfortable. They understand me. I understand them. We have instant connection. And so I thought I was brilliant and had thought of this issue. And then I read an article by Dr. Travis Langley and found out that he actually named it interpersonal versus intrapersonal, the stories that we respond to individually, and then the community. And that's the paradigm with which I work and with which I do the work of Project FanCare. So Janina and Lynn, my first question is, okay, since I have experienced this and I've heard stories from multiple fans that have experienced this, taking the two ways. First, let's talk about the way the stories impact us individually and help us deal and cope and model behavior, and the science behind that.
Well, one of the most interesting bits of research I think that I've ever come across in doing this research on why it's powerful to be a fan is the research that shows, well, there's a couple, but one that pops into my mind right away is the research that shows that the way we respond to our favorite shows and our favorite fictional characters, not something that we've just watched casually, but something like you're talking about, like Buffy, or I'm thinking about Supernatural, or Janina with Harry Potter, or any of those things that are so important to us that we watch them or read them and interact with them again and again and again, perhaps over a really long period of time. In the case of a show like Supernatural that's been on the air for 15 years, that is a really long time to be in a relationship with a fictional character. And the research shows that when we immerse ourselves in those properties, those media landscapes, those fictional characters that are so beloved and so familiar to us, that the brain chemistry changes that happen are the exact same things that happen when we sit down with our closest family members or our closest friends. Like, our brains don't distinguish. That's beloved and familiar, and it can be used, as you've just illustrated perfectly, Christine. Those characters can be used to inspire us, and we build our identity development around them, and we get their validation, our validation in life from them. They are important. So I love that research because it takes it out of the realm of, this is how I feel or this is how I think. No, your brain is actually reacting in the same way as it would. And I think that's very validating and very powerful.
I agree. And I think that when we look at research related to the way that mental health shows up in individuals who are struggling with shame, I think what we're finding is that very often individuals who believe that they're alone in their experience, or that they're not allowed to feel their feelings, as you were mentioning, Christine, are likely to then withdraw from other people and lack the understanding that they're not only allowed to feel their emotions, but actually that their emotions might actually be telling them what they need to process and what they need to get through this very challenging moment. So a lot of times when we meet another individual who might be going through something similar, who might, for example, also be in a relationship where they're made to feel like they are not allowed to feel their feelings, or maybe somebody who survived sexual assault, if they meet another survivor of sexual assault, it might allow this person to have an easier time sharing their story. But what happens if we don't know anybody else who's been through something that we're going through right now? Or what if we have been made to feel like it's a shame to share our emotions, like we have to stifle our emotions and put them in a box somewhere? Well, in that situation, sometimes fictional stories can serve as almost like a social surrogate, as like, a friend that we might not have that we might be missing, a support system that we might be missing. And it might allow us to realize that A, we're not alone, and B, that our story is not unique, that there are a lot of people who've been through something similar, and that through sharing our story, we can actually help other people. And through seeing the way that our favorite fictional characters have coped with their trauma, depression, anxiety, grief, etc., we might also learn that there is always hope. We might learn to follow their footsteps of, for example, communicating to their friends or fighting our own internal monsters or finding a sense of purpose. And so I think that very often stories can be kind of a mirror to our own experiences when we don't have the words or the training to elaborate on what we're going through. And they might also create a safe environment for us to share our experiences by talking to other people within the same fandom. And the cool thing is that there's research now showing evidence of that being extremely beneficial, as Lynn was mentioning.
Now, I've been doing the live panels for, over a year, probably a year and a half now. And one of the things we've heard from the people who attend the panels, and one of the things I've started to incorporate into the panels, is the idea that so many of them find the truth, that there is truth, that the stories work, that they work that they work in various therapeutic ways to help with coping, but that their friends or family are saying, oh, that's just a TV show, it's just a movie, you're silly to be that involved in that. And one of the things I want to do for the audience is to encourage them that these are valid things to use, completely valid things to use. I think of it as sitting around the campfire as Neanderthals. They were telling stories. Well, once language was invented, they were telling stories. The oldest civilizations told each other stories. So it's not like all of a sudden we have developed this new way of relating and processing. I mean, this is stuff that's in human DNA that we've been doing for millennia.
Yeah, it's why psychologists have used what's called narrative therapy forever, because that's how we author our own stories about our lives, and that's how we understand our lives. So we are literally wired to connect to each other through stories. Absolutely.
And it's interesting because stories that are over 3,000 years old, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, are still relevant today, right? Some of the Greek tragedies and comedies are still relevant today. I know that a few years ago, there was a theater company in the United States that went around different VA hospitals and put on a show based on the Odyssey, where we see different characters' experiences after the Trojan War was over. In particularly, one of the characters, Ajax, that appears to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, back then, that wasn't known, but all the symptoms are there. And unfortunately, I apologize if this is a 3,000-year-old spoiler, he ends up dying by suicide. And a lot of veterans actually reported that the symptoms that Ajax went through were symptoms that they were going through. They were able to share with journalists as well as their spouses, I'm Ajax. I've talked to Ajax. I've been Ajax. And it was such a profound experience for veterans in that theater to realize that they were connecting to a fictional character from a 3,000-year-old story, and that everybody else there, every veteran in that room, was also going through something similar.
We're going to talk about the other aspect, which is how fandom provides a supportive, accepting, encouraging community for many of us for the first time. For me, not maybe the first time I ever felt that supported, but certainly the first time in decades since I've been an adult that I've felt that supported. So now talk a little bit about the research that shows how much we need community, because I've seen studies that show that if you don't have community, your health risks risk for cardiovascular, autoimmune disease, diabetes go up simply because you don't have that human connection. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, and it makes sense. We're pre-wired for connection, right? We're social beings, and especially in the past, like hundreds of years ago, if you're not a part of the group, then you could be eaten by a lion or you didn't get to eat. And so now when we're not a part of the community, actually our stress response goes up, and we're then risking heart disease. But the other thing that happens too is that we have this, what I call magical, it's not actually magical, but this hormone called oxytocin in our body. This hormone is released when we're under a lot of stress, but we're receiving support. So it's interesting because it's a stress hormone, but it's there to soothe us. So, for example, if you're a parent and you see a crying child, you'll pick them up, and of course you'll be distressed that your child is hurting. But by picking up that child, by comforting that child, not only are you soothing the child, you're soothing yourself too. So by supporting other people or by receiving support from others, we're creating more of this hormone in our body. Now, this hormone has been shown to be involved in not only emotional soothing, but also in improving our cardiac health. In fact, our heart even has receptors for this hormone. And so it seems that by creating meaningful and supportive communities, we're potentially having more of this very healing hormone in our body, therefore strengthening our cardiovascular health, maybe even our immune system, because it seems that when we're getting social support, our immune system is stronger too. And there's even research suggesting that our longevity is improved when we have social support, when we have meaningful social support. Now, these are correlational studies, but if they're to be believed, that means that if we have meaningful social support community, let's say fandom, then we might even extend our lifespan simply by having this kind of an interaction.
And there's even some research out there that shows that opioid addiction in particular, which of course is epidemic around the world, that what that opioid addiction does for people is similar to what happens to our brains and bodies when we're having those bonding moments. That's the thing that is missing. And that in particular, with opioids, those are the receptors that are being impacted. So, you could say that a lot of the really serious issues that humans are facing in an age of a lot of disconnection are really directly related to that feeling that we're all hungry before. I mean, like Janina said, belongingness sounds like a very psychological thing, but if you go back in time, if you didn't belong to the group, you were eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I mean, you were literally dead. So we are wired that is a dangerous state for a human to feel like they're in. We need that community.
Let's see, Chad, I'd like to bring you into the conversation here. Chad, you have your own story of how film, TV, and fandom helped you through some really tough times. So tell us about that.
And so Easter weekend of 2018, I had a client at a convention in Texas, and it was a stressful Saturday. My personality in general is I generally am not an aggressive, angry person. That side of me just doesn't usually come out. Most stuff just kind of rolls off me.
Which is a good characteristic for an agent.
Well, yeah, especially when damage control is half of what you do. But so I got to my hotel room that night, and it's midnight, beautiful. This would have been in Houston. Beautiful evening. I'm getting ready to fall asleep, and all of a sudden, my heart starts racing, and I'm having trouble catching my breath. And I know physically there's not an issue, but it dawns on me that I'm having an anxiety attack, and it was my very first one. Eventually, we get to October of 2018, and I went to a doctor, got officially diagnosed with acute anxiety and depression. I started talking with a therapist at the time, which did help, but not enough. So finally, November, I had medication for it. Fast forward to February of last year, 2019. And a combination of things led to the death of a parent, my mother, who was very influential in my life. Within 24 hours of her passing, one of my clients, who was a recurring character, actor on Stargate SG-1, passed away, who I was very close to. So it was a 1-2 punch. And I was having a hard time. I knew I needed to grieve, and I knew that the only way I was going to start to really process was to get the first step started. And it took me finally being like, to force myself to do it, to force myself to try to not synergize, but to kind of parallel my emotions with something I'd seen on screen. And so I turned to Buffy. Season 5, The Body. Buffy walks in and, hi, Mom, and Joyce is laying there on the couch, frozen. And not so much that scene, although, that jolt, I mean, there were cues that Joss took when he directed that in terms of the direction that he had Sarah Michelle Gellar handle things, the staring into outside and just kind of closing everything off. Your hearing disappearing and you're not paying attention. The imagining, oh, she's okay, and having go through all of those techniques mirrored what I had felt initially during those first couple days. And I couldn't process it. It was really weird because I couldn't process it myself. But once I was able to watch it, and I'd seen the episodes so many times over the years, but it was a Hail Mary for me on trying to access my emotions with my mom.
We try to make these panels as practical as possible. We try to, we don't want to get people all motivated, like, I can use this. This is exciting. I now can explain to my mother why this is important. But then they walk out and there are no practical actions. What do I do now? So we try to make this as practical as possible. So Lynn, Janina, or Chad, in addition to some of the things we've already talked about, which I will summarize at the end of the video, what are some practical ways either you use pop culture in your practice or you see other people using it to really help them, either from the story aspect or the community aspect?
The biggest thing is people sharing their experiences. It could be posting within a fandom community. For example, I know Supernatural has a hashtag SBN family, and so that gets seen, on Twitter, for example. If somebody shares that they're going through a hard time, they'll get hundreds of responses in some cases from the community helping them with the issue that they're going through, just with community support. So sharing stories. I also think looking for ways of maybe reading certain books. I know Lynn has a ton of books related to Supernatural. I have some books. There's so many books in general relating to psychology and fandom and mental health. There are a lot of articles out there. So I think just kind of immersing ourselves in these areas so that we can learn more. And then maybe also looking for the kind of episodes that resemble what we're going through. Because Chad and Christina, I was so grateful that you both shared your stories. And I imagine that they're really common for a lot of folks, to where if you're going through grief, if you're going through maybe panic attacks or some kind of other experience, maybe purposely looking for an episode where there's a character that's going through something similar.
And see, and I deep down, I knew, having gone through some therapy and stuff prior, trying to figure out a way, I knew I couldn't access my emotions. And I purposely knew if I ended up throwing The Body in, I didn't know if it would be the first time or the fourth time just rolling through, that something would finally. And so, I mean, it was very purposeful. I knew going into it that was what it was going to take to start to break that dam.
And it's very courageous and a very insightful choice. And I hope those of you that are watching this panel might be able to engage in something similar. Sometimes we think that if we're going to open ourselves to grief, that we're going to break. but actually that's how we heal. If we imagine this is a water bottle, but if we imagine that this is a soda can and that we shake it and we shake it and we shake it with grief and trauma, what's going to happen? The pressure builds up and it's got to go somewhere, right? So it might explode, and that's how panic attacks happen. It's not always, but sometimes panic attacks could be due to burnout or unprocessed grief. And so what we're doing when we're allowing ourselves to grieve is we're slowly opening that water bottle or that soda bottle and allow the pressure to settle so that we can start feeling like ourselves again.
It's really, I think I can speak for Janina and myself, it's really the reason why we have put together many of the books that we've put together, because, for example, the one that I just put out, the There Will Be Peace When You Are Done, it's about celebrating the legacy of Supernatural, which is now coming to an end after 15 years. And one of the things I've written about over and over again is the importance of these fictional stories and characters in our lives. So validating that as a real loss and real grief is also something important. So you can go to a book like that, or to like many of them that Janina has written, and it's kind of a physical sort of transitional object to help us express our emotions, because we're reading the emotions expressed by other people, both the actors that portray those characters that we look up to and the fans who feel like us.
So I think I'm finished up. Is there anything either of you would like to talk about or say on camera before we end?
Just that I hope that fans will feel good about being fans. And if you do get that occasional, like, what are you upset about? It's just a television show. Who cares? Like, it's not important. Know that there's real research and science and an awful lot of data behind the fact that that is not true. These things are important to us, and it's okay to make them important and get all the good things that you can from them, and also use them in a way to express your own emotions, including grief and anger and joy, the full range of human emotions, because it's all there.
That's true. Good. Well, thank you guys so much. Like I said, I'm so excited to edit this video because we got such good content. Now, if this were the live panel, we would now open it up to audience participation. We would ask the audience what character or film or TV show or specific episode helped you deal with something that was really hard. And I'd love it if you would help us recreate that experience by leaving your comments down below. I also wanted to recap some of the specific ways that you can use film, TV, and fandom to improve your own mental health. First, if you are dealing with an issue, find a film or TV show or book that deals directly with that issue, like Chad did when he purposely watched the Buffy the Vampire episode, The Body, to process his grief. Second, if you are seeing a therapist and dealing with an issue that you cannot put into words, find a scene from a TV show or movie or a passage from a book and show it to your therapist and say, I can't articulate what I'm feeling, but this does. And finally, as Lynn and Janina both said, find a place online or a book that has lots of fan experiences in it, something that can connect you to the larger community so you can hear other people's stories. Often when we're in the middle of depression or anxiety, we feel like we're completely alone and no one else has ever experienced this. But you are not alone, and there are people who have experienced what you're going through. I guarantee it. Listening to other people's stories helps create that sense of belonging and community that we need to move forward. I've listed down below any resources that anyone talked about. I've also included a PDF of the handout that we give to people in our live panels. It's basically a listing of the national crisis helplines, so you can put it on your refrigerator for emergency. If you like this this content and want to make sure you don't miss a video, please subscribe. And finally, let me know in the comments below if there's a specific topic that you would like to see us talk about. And if you want to watch more videos that talk about how film, TV, and fandom can help us process depression, anxiety, and trauma, or if you want to hear more details about my own personal journey, check out our playlists.